Morning all. Should we introduce ourselves?
I'm James Huston, and I was with the 134th Infantry Regiment, 35th Division in France.
I'm Henry Morgan, but instead of Henry, my friends call me Hank. I joined the 35th Division in October 1943, shortly after graduating from West Point in the officers' basic course at our infantry school.
My name is William Notley. My nickname is Bill. I joined the 320th Infantry Regiment in January of 1943 in San Luis Obispo, California. I think we'd rather have the time answering questions.
I would like to know what was your life before the war?
I was a graduate student at New York University, just about finishing when the Pearl Harbor attack began. And from there, went to Fort Benning, Georgia, for retraining. So I entered active duty as a second lieutenant. And at the time of the invasion, I was the first lieutenant. And at various times, the intelligence officer we called S2, and the operations training officer we called S3. And those are my two positions. At the time in Normandy, it was S2.
I was born in Dallas, Texas. I spent much of my childhood, however, in Oklahoma, because my father's work took him there for a few years, back to Dallas, where I finished high school. This was during the Depression. How was I going to fund myself to college? I worked for a year, and then I learned of the Army preparatory schools. So I enlisted in the Army, went to the preparatory school in Georgia, won a competitive appointment to the military academy at West Point, graduated in '43, 1 year before we got to Normandy. We sailed for England on the 12th of May, 1944, my 24th birthday.
Because I'd had junior ROTC training in high school for 4 years, I was made corporal within a month of joining the regiment. Like Hank, we went through the same areas of training, left the country the same date, arrived in England the same date, so I won't repeat that. It would just be redundant.
How did you train psychologically and physically to the war?
We were training all the time, constantly, until we moved to Europe.
There was a series of training films called Why We Fight that were given periodically all summer long in 1943 when we were at camp. They explained the situation in Europe, explained the horrible characteristics of the Nazis in Europe, explained what had happened in the occupation of France and so on. I think that's what you might mean by psychological training.
What was your vision of the war before leaving?
Well, I don't think we knew a whole lot about the war. I had read in high school Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, and I understood what a horrible prospect that was for the world if it continued. Until Pearl Harbor, I don't think we really thought too much about war.
In the news, we followed the war. I can recall as they came approaching in Paris. Remember General de Gaulle, France has lost a battle, it has not lost the war.
Before the landing in Normandy, what did you know about what was going to happen?
No one, of course, knew exactly what was going to happen, obviously. We, in the 35th Division, who did not land on D-Day saw many very tough battles later, that's true, but not the intense, tragic fighting that took place on D-Day. On D-Day, here I was, along with other officers in my unit, sitting comfortably at breakfast, safe, warm, and all around the room were loudspeakers. And it was almost like a football game as the British broadcasting system and the United States Army radio service were broadcasting all this hell that was taking place at only about 100-mile straight line distance from where we were. Was weird and strange.
In which conditions did you land?
We boarded ships on the 4th of July and landed at Omaha Beach on the 6th. Well, our own landing was safe, although long-range German artillery, I think, could still reach, and we still had to wade in from about 100 yards offshore with all of our heavy gear, climbing down the rope ladders into the landing craft, but still getting off in fairly deep water, and still climbing that blasted hill after getting off, but far different from what it was 30 days before that.
I've discussed some of the D-Day landing with officers who were there. It was not the same everywhere. Some places very intense. A company from Bedford, near where we live now, lost the whole company of the men in that one first hour. And I talked, and another officer had his platoon just nearby, had not a single casualty that day.
Did you have a good impressions when you see the first French?
Well, the first civilians that I saw was at a farm not far from the beach, where we spent our first night in bivouac. And if you know what a K ration is, it's the emergency ration we carried when we weren't going to be able to have a hot meal. I think it was the breakfast K ration, had a chocolate, what was called D-bar. A group of us pooled our D-bars, gave them to the French farm lady. She carved them up, chopped them up, put them in with milk, and we had some delicious hot chocolate.
What do you remember about the Battle of Saint-Lô? What are the most important facts?
On the 9th of July, we relieved a portion of the 29th Division, the division really most responsible for liberating Saint-Lô. But we joined in that fight for Saint-Lô and attacked for the first time on the 11th of July. But all of our fighting was in support of reaching Saint-Lô.
Our 35th Division was coming into Saint-Lô from the north, and the 29th Division was coming in from the northeast. The 29th landed on D-Day, suffered very severe casualties, and so they were happy when we came in to relieve a part of them, to take over that part of their front. Our group came into Saint-Lô on July the 18th. We got a view from a bluff above the Veer River, all rubble. And we went down into Saint-Lô, nobody there. The other division was the other part of the city, nobody where we were. You walk along that rubble, the Notre Dame Church had been mostly destroyed, all the buildings around it. But we went all through that area on that evening.
I myself never entered the city until 2.5 years later, when I spent 3 weeks refighting my war step by step. And during the war, I only saw Saint-Lô from a distance and could see the ruins, but that's it.
What was the most dangerous operation into which you were involved?
if you're going to be killed, you're going to be killed. How can any situation that you're going to be killed be any more dangerous than the other? I would find that very difficult to respond to.
Every day in combat is an exciting story in itself. I suppose the two most dramatic, that might be the proper word, if not dangerous, the most dramatic experiences for me with our very first day in the advance and the 3 days around Mortain in the middle of August.
Our worst day was the day everybody referred to afterward as Bloody Sunday. Local attack in the hedgerows just south of St. Lo. We'd been attacking each morning, and we gained about a hedgerow or two and then another one. Until that day the battalion suffered probably half of casualties. The aid station, which was across the road, was hit. One man was having his hand wound developed and a shell took his arm. People would be coming on the stretchers coming from the front, and all three of them got hit by artillery fire. And the battalion commander, the lieutenant colonel, was killed by fire that day. What was most dangerous were the tree bursts. When the shells would come in and hit the trees, and fragments would scatter. And so to catch a lot of people in one shell. And that was the worst day that we had.
We had a mixture of self-confidence because we knew we were well trained, but frightened, of course, terrified, as any honest person would be, all the time. I must tell you that later on, I often thought, my God, this is terrible being frightened all the time, but this is living. Nothing is like this in the experience of a man fighting. It's exciting and intriguing, despite the fear. Strange, perhaps, but I think other people doubtless felt the same way.
Let me give you a tactical situation that I'll combine with the idea of fear. The tactical situation was that a German machine gunner was controlling a roadway that our company had to cross. One man wasn't worth wasting artillery on. He had to be removed. My captain, Ed Casey, asked me and my first gunner to go up and see if we could capture him. The reason he sent my first gunner was that he was Jewish and could speak Yiddish, which is understandable by Germans. We arrived at where this man was, obviously very badly hurt. Reuben held out a pack of cigarettes, and this young man, very handsome kid, blonde, blue-eyed, the typical Nazi, smiled. And then Reuben spoke in Yiddish. And the hateful look that came on that soldier's face was absolutely the most frightening thing I've ever seen in my life. How anybody could show hatred just because he heard a Jew talk. I've never forgotten it. That's fear to me. And of course I was frightened a lot during the war, but I was never frightened so much as I was that day.
Was it difficult to find back a normal life after the war?
For me, it was not at all. I did academic life before and picked right up after the academic life afterward.
I was already a professional officer, having graduated from West Point, so I just continued.
I was discharged from the Army just before Christmas in 1945. I'd been in the Army exactly 35 months. What I did at first, as I recall, was sleep and eat for about 2 months.
What message do you want to pass on the new generation?
Literature, if you have not already read it, read Voltaire's Candide. I'm sure you are sophisticated enough to understand the satire and how it fits the world today just as much as it did in 1759 when it was published.
I think it's wonderful the way that the Norman citizens have rebuilt their lives after that terrible ordeal. Your elders in Normandy know very well indeed, freedom is not free.
Remember the famous oration of Pericles, secret of happiness is freedom, and the secret of freedom is courage.
It pleases me to know that they are interested. Simply as a pleasure to talk to them and answer their questions.
It's very encouraging to see their interest in studying the lessons of World War II. And that can be very helpful as we develop our policies in the future, hoping for peace and freedom.
And it's important, I think, when I am asked to talk with young people about my experiences in the war, to tell them as clearly as I possibly can what those experiences were and what they meant to me and what I think means to society in general.